All right, so in this video conference, I'm going to basically walk through the Futato exercises from last week. We're going to look at the exercises in lesson 3, specifically on Shava and on Dagesh. Now, my goal in a lot of this is to give you sort of the simplest, um, let's put it this way, to prioritize the information that you're given. So when there's a shortcut, I want to give you a shortcut with the caveat that a shortcut won't cover every situation. I recently posted a video with some flowcharts going through how to identify whether a Shava is vocal or silent and how to identify whether a Dagesh is weak or strong. And in those videos, I actually go through a couple of the exercises here, kind of illustrating some tricky situations. I want you to know that when I give you a shortcut on Shava, it's going to cover 90 to 95% of situations. It's very, very efficient, but there's still going to be 5 to 10% of the time where that shortcut may appear to not work. I think that I covered the exceptions in that video, but it is a shortcut, so it's not going to cover everything. But if you prioritize the shortcuts, you run much you run much less of a risk of feeling overwhelmed, like you're drowning in the information. You can kind of chunk it. You can process the most important stuff first, get that down, and then build on that, nuancing your understanding as you go. So the shortcut that I shared on Shava, this is actually a shortcut that Futato himself shares, and I think the shortcut cuts out the other rules that he mentioned as well. So the first kind of most basic rule that you want to learn, or at least the most all-encompassing rule that you want to learn for Shava, is what we call the short is silent rule. And that basically, the way that it gets applied is when you come to a word with a Shava, you look at the Shava and you ask yourself, is this Shava immediately preceded by a short vowel? Now, obviously, in the way that Hebrew flows, the Shava will be immediately preceded by whatever letter is holding it. That's not what we mean. We mean when you look at the letter preceding the Shava letter, does that have a short vowel? So, number 1, short hirik. Number 2, short patak. Number 3, short segel. Number 4, short kibbutz. Pardon me. Number 5, short hirik. All of these, 1 through 5, have short vowels immediately preceding the Shava, and so the Shava is going to be silent in each of those cases. Number 6, we get ko tivim. Here the Shava is immediately preceded by a holam vav. Holam vav is a long vowel, it's not short. Therefore, the Shava is vocal rather than silent. Number 7, same thing. Sere, Futato calls it medium, but it's not short, so the Shava is vocal. Number 8, you might think that the short is silent rule might not apply, but ask it, is the Shava letter immediately preceded by a short vowel? Well, it's not preceded by any vowel, and if it's not preceded by any vowel, then it's not preceded by a short vowel. Therefore, it is vocal. Now, you could learn a separate rule that says an initial Shava is always vocal, and that's fine. It's an easy rule to remember. But it is another rule to remember. And I just want to show you that this short is silent rule actually covers a lot more than you might realize. Same thing applies to number 9. We've got a separate rule for internal consecutive Shavas that tells us that the first Shava in a consecutive series is silent, the second one is vocal. But you can actually figure that out just using the short is silent rule. On the first one, we've got the first Shava is immediately preceded by the short hirik. Therefore, the first Shava is silent. The second Shava is immediately preceded by a short Shava. And that's not, or I'm sorry, I just screwed that up. The second Shava is immediately preceded by a silent Shava. And so a silent Shava is not short. Therefore, the second one has to be vocal. That right there shows us that it actually proves the internal consecutive cheval rule via the short is silent rule. Like, we can apply the short is silent rule to many more cases than just kind of the basic case that Futato gives us. So that's what I tried to outline in the video, where I go over sort of the flow charts of the cheval rule and the Dagesh rule, um, showing you that these shortcuts, again, they're shortcuts. They won't cover every situation. But if you can prioritize the shortcuts, um, it will reduce kind of how front loaded the information is. You just master a little bit of information that covers a lot of situations, then you can develop and nuance your understanding. How's it going, Michael? See that you joined us. What I want to do is prioritize any questions that you might have as we go through. So if there is something you want to cover, don't ever, or even just if I'm going through something here and you have a question, don't hesitate to stop me and jump in on the microphone, just because I might not see a wave or anything like that. All right. Okay. All right. Sounds good. All right. So, yeah, number 9, we can apply this internal consecutive cheval rule that says the first one is silent, the second one's vocal. But if we don't want to memorize another rule, short is silent will get us there as well. Number 10, again, we could memorize the initial cheval rule, but short is silent will tackle this one as well. Is this cheval preceded immediately by a short vowel? No, it's not preceded by any vowel, therefore it's vocal. All right, and so as we keep going through here, we can see that short is silent rule will cover all of these, except maybe number 11. Now, number 11 is the one that always gives students trouble. And the reason why is because right now you're thinking in terms of cheval. You've gone through all of these where you see a cheval, you look at the vowel before it. See a cheval, look at the vowel before it. Well, you come to number 11, you see a cheval, you look at the vowel before it. It's a short heroic. Short is silent, therefore the cheval is vocal. The problem is the Dagesh. Okay, so we've learned that there's 2 kinds of what we might call Dageshim, I guess. There are the strong Dageshim, which double a consonant, and there are the weak Dageshim that only appear in a Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Kaf, Pei, and Tav. There are only 6 letters that a weak Dagesh will appear in. And all that Dagesh does is harden the pronunciation of some of those letters. So we have to figure out, anytime we see a Dagesh, is it a strong doubling Dagesh, or is it a weak Dagesh? In number 11, it's pretty straightforward, because the weak Dagesh can only occur in 6 different letters, and Tet is not one of those 6. So by default, Tet with a Dagesh has to be a doubling Dagesh. It has to be a strong Dagesh. The reason why this is tricky is what's actually going on here with the doubling Dagesh is you are doubling the consonant letter. I don't want you to think that you're doubling the vowel. I know that when I write this out here, it looks like I've doubled the cheval. But let's look at another example down here. Now, I'm going to actually write this out in Hebrew because I think it might be more helpful. So we've got, now I'm not typing out number 15 down here, I'm going to type out number 14. So we've got Yod Shavah, we've got Dalet Patach, we've got Beit, Sere, Resh. When you see a vowel under a double Dagesh, under a strong Dagesh, that vowel is under the second of the 2 double letters, okay? That vowel is not under both letters. It's only under the final one. So what does that leave us with in the first of the 2 doubled letters? Well, that letter doesn't get a vowel. It doesn't get its own vowel because you've got 2 double letters together. Basically what ends up happening there is you divide a syllable between those 2. And when you have a closed syllable, by definition, that means that the closing consonant does not have its own vowel. This is what the silent schwa is for. The silent schwa exists to close a syllable. It is not a vowel. Even though schwa is a vowel in the sense that a vocal schwa, we might call it a semi-vowel or a half vowel, the silent schwa has no vocalic value whatsoever. It's just kind of a syllable divider, all right? And so if we were to write out number 14, the word here, yedaber, it would look like this. Now, technically, we would also put, if we wrote it out like this, we would then put a weak dagesh in the second bait. But we write this out, the first consonant in a double dagesh, strong dagesh, dagesh forte pair, the first one will always have a silent schwa. Right, so you need to understand that when you see a dagesh forte there, that tiny, tiny little dot inside the bait, for example here, if you were to pull up a microscope and look at that dagesh under the microscope, in this particular situation, you would see curled up inside of that bait, a bait with a silent schwa. Okay, that's what the dagesh represents. It is telling you that there is a doubled consonant, and because it's a doubled consonant, the first of those two, the first in the doublet, is going to have a silent schwa because it's ending the previous syllable. The second one, if it's a begad kufat letter, will have a weak dagesh in it. Now, I hate to even say that because I don't want to confuse you. This is not a weak dagesh. This is a doubling dagesh. But if we didn't have it here, if we spelled it out like this, the second letter would still get even a weak dagesh if it's in a begad kufat letter, because a begad kufat letter will have the weak dagesh when it begins a syllable. All right, and so that's what's going on. Forget all of that talk about the weak dagesh in this situation. I want you to focus on one simple idea. When you have a dagesh forte, well, let's go back up to the actual example. When you have a dagesh forte and a schwa in the same letter, the schwa will always be vocal. Now, if you want to, you can go and memorize that rule as a separate rule. And now you have a couple rules to memorize if you want to. You've got the shortcut dagesh rule. Well, I guess we're talking about schwa here. You've got the shortcut schwa rule, short is silent. And that doesn't seem to apply here. So now we'll memorize a backup rule to cover this weird situation. And now we'll memorize two rules. You can do that if you want to. But I contend that the short is silent rule still applies even here, if you understand what the dagesh represents. The dagesh represents the first of the doubled letters with a silent schwa. So if we write that out for yiktelu, we're going to get, for kitlu, we're going to get the kov hirik tet silent schwa, tet vocal schwa, lu. How do I know this is a vocal schwa? Well, it depends on whether or not this is a vocal schwa. Okay? Well, it really doesn't. It really doesn't. Because the short is silent rule, if we employ it here, I like to start from the first schwa in a word to apply this rule, but you can do it either way. Because whether this is vocal or silent, it's not a short vowel. Vocal schwa is a reduced vowel. It's not short. And silent schwa isn't a vowel at all. So no matter what this schwa is not preceded by a short vowel. Therefore, this schwa is vocal. This schwa is preceded by the short hirik. So we know that this schwa is silent. So short is silent still works here. The final schwa is vocal. The initial schwa is silent. You just have to remember that the schwa that you see here in a dagesh forte, strong dagesh, doubling dagesh situation, the schwa that you see is the schwa under the second letter. Okay? And since it's under the second letter, and since the dagesh forte implies the first of the doublet with a silent schwa, this shava is not preceded by a short vowel. There's this intervening tet with a silent shava between this shava and the hirik. Okay, so I don't want to make it more complicated, but I do want to show you that that short is silent rule does still work. Now, it may be easier just to memorize that when you have a dagesh forte and a shava in the same letter, the shava is going to be vocal. In fact, when you have any dagesh and a shava in the same letter, most of the time it will be vocal. There is one exception that we'll learn about next week in one of the verb forms where you technically get a weak dagesh at the very end of a word, which is really weird, and it will have a shava under it that happens to be silent, and that's just a whole weird situation. That's the only exception to the short is silent rule. Well, yeah, it is. It is an exception to that. There's all kinds of exceptions that happen with that. If you've taken a peek ahead at lesson number 6, the particular form that I'm talking about here is, let's get to our conjugation chart. Here we go. The particular form that I'm talking about is the second person feminine singular form. You can see that it ends with 2 consecutive shavas. And this breaks all kinds of rules, quote unquote. But inevitably in this situation, this dagesh, when it appears, is a weak dagesh. And this shava, when it appears, is a silent shava, as is the shava here. So again, it's a weird situation. It is the exception to most of the shava rules. But that's why I say that the shortcut covers most of the rules. It doesn't cover all of them. All right. Yeah. If it's at the end of the word, yes, I'm trying to think. Is there any exception to that? And I can't think of an exception to that. Exactly. If you've remembered that rule, that a shava at the end of a word is silent, then you have no problems. But if you want to try to skate by on the shortcut, I do want you to be aware that there's going to be some places where it looks like the shortcut doesn't quite work. But that's the nature of a shortcut. It's not You're not going to win every single time. It's going to be real easy to master the shortcut, and that shortcut's going to work a lot of the time. So start there. And then once you've got that down, now you can nuance your understanding and develop your understanding a little bit more precisely. But this way, you don't have to start by memorizing 5 different shava rules. You only have to memorize one, and you can build on it. So, yeah, always be careful. And if at any point you guys run into what you think is an exception to the rule, let me know. Because I'll first of all clarify whether or not it is actually an exception. There may just be a misunderstanding. And then if there is, I'll let you know if there's sort of, another rule that might help you navigate that exception. So let's see here. We're on Keatlu, and that was number 11. Okay, so we did Keatlu. Again, this is the one, every single semester I get questions about this one because it is tricky. But remember, this dagesh forte means you have 2 tets there. And when you have a dagesh forte or a doubling dagesh, the first of the doublet, the first letter in that doublet is always going to have a silent shava. Okay, so number 12, again, we're back to the regular 12, 13, 12 and 13. You've got a shava preceded by short patak, short hirik. No big deal. These are silent. Number 14, again, that initial shava will always be vocal, just like the final shava is always silent. The initial shava is always vocal. You can memorize that extra rule, or you can just ask yourself, is this shava immediately preceded by a short vowel? No, it's not preceded by any vowel. So the answer is no, therefore it isn't short, it's vocal. And then number 15, we've got 2 shavas in this word, but these are not consecutive. So we need to deal with them independently. The first one, is it preceded by a short vowel? No, it's not preceded by any vowel. Therefore, the first shava is vocal. What about the second Shava? Now this could get tricky again because it's under a Dagesh, and we have to figure out, is this Dagesh vocal, or I'm sorry, um, is this Dagesh strong or weak? Is it a doubling Dagesh or is it just a Bagad Kafat Dagesh? Well, and the reason why we have to figure that out is because if it is just a Bagad Kafat Dagesh, then strangely, I may not be too strange to you at this point, but this would be strange if this were not a Dagesh Forte, just in the way the word is spelled. But that would mean that it is preceded by a short vowel if this were not a doubling Dagesh. So we have to find that out. If you have a Shava in a Dagesh letter, you have to determine the nature of the Dagesh. Is it weak or is it strong? Is it doubling or is it Bagad Kafat? Because that will help you know whether or not this is actually preceded by a short vowel. So again, let's answer the question first of whether this Dagesh is strong or weak. The sort of shortcut rule for Dagesh that I covered was, and it's kind of a compound rule, so there's kind of two parts to it, but if the letter containing the Dagesh is immediately preceded by a vowel sound, not necessarily a short vowel, but any vowel sound, if the sound immediately preceding the Dagesh letter is a vowel, which here it's patach, then it's a strong Dagesh, it's a doubling Dagesh. If the sound immediately preceding the Dagesh letter, immediately preceding the bait, is a consonant, then the Dagesh would be weak. It would be a Begad Kafat Dagesh. All right, so what is the situation here? Well, here, the Dagesh letter is immediately preceded by the patach. That is a vowel sound. Therefore, we know that this is a strong doubling Dagesh, a Dagesh forte. All right, and so that tells us that since this is a Dagesh forte, we know that there's actually another bait with a silent Shava in here. So this Shava is not immediately preceded by the short Patach, it's actually immediately preceded by the silent Shava in the first bait. That's what throws a wrench into this one. So this is vocal despite the appearance that it's preceded by the short Patach. It's not really preceded by the short Patach. There's another bait with a silent Shava in it intervening between the two. And that's what makes it tricky, okay? So, that said, we've got a vocal Shava at the beginning, a vocal Shava in the middle. All right, any questions about Shava before we jump into Dagesh there? All right, so let's talk about the Dagesh shortcut now. Again, it's a lot more cumbersome. The Shava shortcut's real snappy. Short is silent. That's easy to remember. The Dagesh one's a little more convoluted. All right, but there's basically 4 elements to keep track of in the Dagesh shortcut. The 4 elements are the Dagesh elements, strong or weak, and the sound elements, vowel or consonant. All right. So in this paradigm, if the Dagesh letter is preceded by a vowel sound, that's the strong Dagesh. If the Dagesh letter is preceded by the consonant sound, that's the weak Dagesh. Okay, that's the rule. If the Dagesh letter is immediately preceded by a vowel sound, the Dagesh is strong. If the Dagesh letter is immediately preceded by a consonant sound, then the Dagesh is weak. Okay, so how are we going to keep this rule together? How are we going to remember that the consonant sound implies weak, the vowel sound implies strong? How do we keep those associated? Here's the way that I do it. All right, and now this may not help you, but this is kind of what works for me. Number 1 and number 2, I'll just tell you without us having to figure out what's going on. I'll tell you that number 1 is a weak Dagesh, number 2 is a strong Dagesh. And here's what helps me remember. If you look at the Dagesh letter, you have to know that this Shava is silent, and we know it's silent because it's preceded by a short Hirik, so this is silent. If you look at the Dagesh letter in number 1, which is weak, remember, there's only one vowel surrounding that letter, okay? That's the kametz here. So each letter, not each letter, there's an opportunity for each letter to be surrounded by two vowels. Its own vowel that comes after it, and the vowel that may come before it. So you can see, for example, in number 2, the dalet is surrounded by the hirik that comes before it and the patak that comes after it. In number 2, the dalet is surrounded by two vowels, the vowel before and the vowel after. The dagesh in number 2 is strong enough to carry two vowels. It can carry the hirik before it and the patak after it. I'm not saying that the hirik is the vowel of the dalet. I'm just saying that the dagesh in the dalet is strong enough to deal with two vowels surrounding it, one before it and one after it. The dagesh in number 1, we know it's a weak dagesh, and we know this is a silent shavah. So this is how I associate consonant with weak and vowel with strong. If you've got a dagesh that has a vowel before it and after it, you've got two vowels. You've also got a strong vowel, because the rule says that if it's preceded by a vowel sound, it's going to be strong. So the strong dagesh can hold two vowels. The weak dagesh can only hold one. If this letter is a silent shavah, that's not a vowel at all. The sound preceding the dagesh letter is the dalet. That means that this is weak. So when you look at mid-bar, the bait is only surrounded by one vowel. That indicates that this dagesh is weak because it's not holding two, it's only holding one. When we look at Kidash, that dagesh letter is surrounded by two vowels. That implies that it's strong enough to carry both vowels. So when I look at a word with a dagesh in it, I'm looking at the vowels surrounding the dagesh. Number 3, the shin is surrounded by two vowels, the hirik and the kametz. That must mean that it's strong enough to carry two vowels. Number 4, I'm looking at the dagesh here. The bait is surrounded by, well, is it surrounded by two vowels or not? That depends on whether this shavah is vocal or silent. We know it's silent because the vowel preceding it is a short hirik, so it's only got one vowel surrounding it. It must be weak. All right? My hope is that after a couple more years of teaching Hebrew, I'll be able to refine this shortcut a little bit so it's not so convoluted. But at this point, if you want one rule for dagesh, the rule basically has to be, if there's a vowel in front of the dagesh letter immediately, it's strong. If there's a consonant immediately in front of the dagesh letter, it's weak. Now, you're never going to have a consonant in front of the dagesh letter within a word where there's absolutely no vowel mark at all. You're always, if there is no vowel, you're always going to have a silent shavah there. I mean, they're going to put something there. And so if the dalet here in number 1 doesn't have its own vowel, that's why we've put the silent shavah in there. But the silent shavah is not a vowel. It's just sort of a syllable divider. All right, so when you look at a word with a dagesh, if it's got a vowel before it and after it, if it's surrounded by vowels, then it must be strong enough to support both vowels. If you look at it, and honestly, this is kind of, I don't want to give you another rule, but it's a pretty easy one. If you see a dagesh and it's got a shavah before it, that dagesh is weak and that shavah is silent. I don't know of any place where you have a dagesh forte preceded by a schwa, vocal or silent. I just don't think that happens. And I also don't know of any place where you have a doggish forte and a silent schwa before it. So when you see this doggish schwa combo, and I should say the schwa doggish combo, where you've got a schwa and then a doggish in the immediate next letter, I can't think of a situation that's an exception to the schwa will be silent, the doggish will be weak. All right. If you see schwa and then doggish, it's going to be silent, weak. Again, I don't want to give you a bunch of new rules. I don't want to multiply the rules. But if that, vowel sound versus consonant sound presents trouble for you, this would be the supplementary rule to kind of handle these situations. All right, so number one, we've got the short vowel, silent schwa, so this is weak. Number two, we've got the vowel, doggish vowel, so this is strong. Number three, we've got vowel, doggish vowel, so this is strong. Number four, we've got silent schwa because it's preceded by the short heroic. Therefore, we've only got one vowel, so it's weak. Number five, we've got a doggish preceded by a schwa, which happens to be silent because it's preceded by the short heroic. So we've only got one vowel, the segel. That one's weak. Number six, we've got a doggish with a vowel before it, vowel after it. Vowel, doggish, vowel means that the doggish was strong enough to support both vowels. Number seven, we've got a doggish with a vowel before it and a vowel after it, so it must be strong enough to support two vowels. Number eight, we've got a doggish with a schwa before it. We can just kind of take the shortcut and go ahead and conclude that that's a silent schwa with a weak doggish. But we will prove it out. We know that this schwa is silent because it's preceded by the short heroic. Therefore, there's only one vowel here surrounding the doggish letter. Therefore, it must be so weak that it can't support two vowels. Number nine, we've got a doggish with a schwa before it and a schwa after it. Now, anytime you have a letter containing both a doggish forte, a strong doubling doggish, and a schwa, that schwa will always be vocal. If you've got a strong doggish and a schwa in the same letter, the schwa will always be vocal. If you've got any doggish and a schwa in the same letter, it will usually be vocal. There is one exception that we'll learn about next time, but that's kind of the basic setup. If you've got a strong doggish and a schwa in the same letter, the schwa will be vocal. Let's prove it out. Looking at the doggish letter, how many vowels surround it? Well, it kind of depends on whether these schwas are vocal or silent. The first one's silent because it's preceded by a short vowel. The second one's vocal because it's not preceded immediately by a short vowel. So it's surrounded by, not even one vowel really. It's kind of like surrounded by half a vowel. So it must be weak. It can't support two vowels. Number 10, the doggish letters preceded by a heroic, followed by a heroic, two vowels. It must be strong enough to support both vowels. Number 11, the doggish is preceded by a heroic, followed by a, I guess it depends. It depends on whether this doggish is strong or weak, which is what we're trying to figure out. So we don't want to get into kind of circular reasoning here. We do have to sort of fall back on our shortcut rule of what sound precedes the doggish letter. If a vowel sound precedes the doggish letter, it's strong. If a consonant sound immediately precedes it, it's weak. Well, here, the heroic immediately precedes it, so it's strong. Since it's strong, we know that this is a vocal schwa. So that is two letters, or I should say that is two vowels, or at least a vowel and a half. So it must be strong enough to carry more than one vowel. But again, this one's tricky. All right? I'm not denying it. It is tricky, but again, hopefully that makes sense to you why. You know this is a doggish forte because it's preceded by a vowel sound. You know that this is a vocal schwa because that dagesh represents a tet with a silent schwa intervening between the schwa and the hirik. All right, number 12, we look at the dagesh. It's surrounded by one vowel, the holem vav. The schwa here is not a vowel. It's silent because it's preceded by a short patach. Number 13, this dagesh is surrounded by one vowel, the holem vav. The schwa here is not a vowel. It is silent because it's preceded by a segel, which is short. Number 14, the dagesh here is preceded by a vowel and followed by a vowel. It has two vowels. Therefore, it must be strong enough to carry both. And then number 15, this dagesh is preceded by a vowel sound, so we know it's strong. And since we know it's strong, we know that the schwa here is vocal. So again, it's strong enough to carry more than one vowel. All right, that's basically it as far as the schwa and the dagesh go. I know they can be confusing. I know that there are some examples here that can be really kind of throw a wrench into things. But the rules do work if you understand them well. Any questions about schwa or dagesh before we briefly take a look at lesson 5 for this week? All right. There are two primary things that I would highlight in lesson 5, and I kind of already did this in the unit 3 announcements, but let's just talk about them real quick. So let's go to the chart for our pronouns, which is up here. All right. So I had one student actually contact me about sort of the strange way that this chart is laid out. As English speakers, when we learn a modern language like French or Spanish or German or something like that, we usually see verb conjugation charts laid out with first person on top, then second person, then third person. I mean, we're used to seeing numbers go from low to high, right? I mean, we're used to that. So why does he have third person on top, and then second person, and then first person, and then beyond that? I can't explain this to you. I don't know why he put the plurals on the left and the singulars on the right. That makes no sense to me, other than the fact that if you're reading in Hebrew, you would start on the right and then go to the left. But this is not how he gives you verb charts, so it's all kinds of confusing. But the reason why he puts third person at the top is because in Hebrew, when we talk about this first verb conjugation, this first verb pattern, it's called the Cal perfect. Cal means light or simple. Perfect means completed. The action is completed. In English, when we speak about completed action, we're usually using the past tense. So he ate, he ran. The action is done, it's completed, it's finished. So we usually use the past tense. Therefore, Cal perfect, you can think of the Cal perfect pattern as the simple past tense. He ate, he ran, he lived, that sort of a thing. All right. When we're looking at that pattern, which is sort of the primary pattern in biblical Hebrew, the reason why we start at the top with the third person is because the third person masculine singular form is the most simple and basic form, and all the other forms are kind of built on top of that. So it wouldn't make sense to list it first person, second person, third person, where you've got a real complicated form at the top and then they get simpler as you go down. In Hebrew, we start with the third person because it's the most simple, and then we build for the second and the first person. All right, so all that to say, that's why he lays this out with third person on top, and then second person, and then first person. Most modern languages like Spanish, French, or German, I'm pretty sure with German, when you conjugate the verb, there's no difference between whether the subject is masculine or feminine in the form of the verb. If you've had Greek Greek doesn't distinguish the verb form if the subject is masculine or feminine. Hebrew does. If the subject is masculine, Hebrew uses a different form of the verb than if the subject is feminine. Okay, so that just be aware of that. That's why we have they masculine plural, they feminine plural, you masculine plural, you feminine plural. And then in the first person, there is no difference in the form of the verb or the pronoun. I should acknowledge this is a pronoun chart, but the reason why the pronoun chart is set up the way it is because it's anticipating the verbal chart. When you get to the first person, there is no difference in the form of the verb or the form of the pronoun, as you see here, whether the subject is masculine or feminine. Okay, if that was really confusing, then just ignore what I said, because I'm just trying to explain to you why he puts the third person at the top, then second person, then first person. Now that you got that, this is what I really want to say about this chart. The thing that's really important to pay attention to here is the spelling of these pronouns. And honestly, this makes a lot more sense if you've already seen the verb chart. So let's just go ahead and we'll pull up the verb chart alongside of it. But for example, they masculine plural. Let's not do that one. Let's start here with the best example is going to be you masculine singular and you feminine singular. Ata and at. In order to build, so we've had the verb achal. Achal means he ate. If I wanted to say you ate, and you are a masculine singular person, if I wanted to say you ate, I would say achal, but then I would add a suffix to achal to indicate its second person. And the suffix I would add comes from this pronoun. I would take this tav, kametz, and I would stick it on the end of achal. So instead of achal, he ate, it would be achalta. Achalta means you, masculine singular, ate. If you happen to be feminine singular, I would say achalt. I would take this tav shava, which by the way, this shava is silent. I would take this tav shava, achalt. That would mean you, feminine singular, ate. When we get to the first person, if I want to say we ate, so this is first person plural, I would take the nu from this pronoun, nu, and I would add it as a suffix to achal, and I would get achal nu. That means we ate. If I wanted to say I ate, I would take achal, and then I would put that T sound, that tav back in there, even though it's not on here, and then I would add the hirik yod from these pronouns to it. Achalti. Achalti would be I ate. You, if I'm speaking to a group of men, you masculine plural. Achal tem. If it's feminine, achal ten. Now here it's attain or atena, but in the verb this shifts to a segel instead of a sere. So achal tem would be you masculine plural ate. Achal ten, taking the ten suffix, would be you feminine plural ate. So let's go over here to the paradigm, and you can see that the basic form, which is the vocabulary form that we learn, here we take the verb katal because it's so regular, but let's just use achal. We would have the patach, we'd have the kametz vowel in the first root letter. Because this is the first root letter, I often refer to this as R1. The R1 letter, that just means the first root letter. R stands for root and 1 stands for first, obviously. So the kof here would be R1, the first root letter. The R1 vowel in the Cal Perfect is the kametz. The R2 vowel, or second root letter vowel, is usually patach. All right, so 3ms would just be achal. Aleph, kametz, kaf, patach, lamet, achal. third feminine singular, in order to make it feminine, as you saw with the nouns, we're just going to throw a kamatse ending on it. And so we would get a chala, aleph, kametz, kaf. Now here, in order to make room for the extra syllable that we've added, because Hebrew likes to keep things down to 2 syllables if possible, in order to make room for that extra syllable, since we've added a kamatse vowel to the end, we're going to reduce the patach to a shavah. Now this is a vocal shavah because it's not preceded by a short vowel. So here we get ka tala. With achal, we would get a chala. But the 3fs ending is just your standard feminine singular kamatse ending. Now it does change this vowel, and that's fine. Don't let it throw you off. You really want to pay attention to the suffixes, because if you can see a kamatse here, it doesn't really matter what these vowels are doing, at least not at this point in your learning. 2ms, again, we take that tav kametz and we stick it on the end. So for katal, that would be katal ta. And actually we accent this syllable, katalta. We've added a silent shavah here on the lamed just because we don't want any naked letters inside of a Hebrew word. So even though lamed doesn't have its own vowel, we add a silent shavah just to fill in that gap. All right, so katal ta. But again, this ta comes from the pronoun. Second feminine singular, we take the tav shavah from the pronoun. We get katalt. Number 1, we take the hirik. I know here it's only highlighting the yod, but we take the hirik yod from the pronouns, and we keep the tav on there for, there is a reason for it. I would have to introduce a new concept to explain it, but we go ahead and we keep that tav in there, and we just add the hirik yod to the end. Katalti. All right? But when you're looking at these suffixes, most of them come from the pronouns. 3fs doesn't come from the pronoun, but it is a kamatse ending, which you're used to seeing for feminine singular anyways. And then the 3ms, you're used to masculine singular nouns not having any ending, and so the 3ms verb doesn't have any extra ending. It's just the root. All right? Then we move to the plural forms. For the third common plural, this doesn't really come from the pronoun. We'll just add a shurik to the end. But shurik, you'll find in Hebrew, often indicates third person plural. Okay, so when you see a shurik on the end of a word, a Hebrew, when he sees a shurik at the end of a word, is going to think plural. It's kind of like our S or ES ending. Not always, for example, the word boss isn't plural, even though it ends in an S, but it often indicates plural. All right, then you've got second person, masculine plural, and feminine plural. Again, atem, we'll just take that tem off. Katal tem. Now you'll notice here, we didn't reduce the R2 vowel, we reduced the R1 vowel. What in the world? Why are we switching which vowel we reduce? It's complicated. It has to do with syllabification in Hebrew, which if you want to learn more about, I find helpful, but Futato does not really go into it because it can be overwhelming for elementary students. All you need to be paying attention to at this level is the suffixes. The suffixes will tell you what you need to know. So tem tells you 2MP, ten tells you 2FP, and new tells you 1CP. That's what I would kind of highlight for you from lesson 5, is the connection between these pronouns and the suffixes on verbs that we'll learn about next week. The only other thing here really is this, the definite article. That's over here. And there's basically 4 forms you need to be aware of. So the way I've explained this before is, if you want to start with really basic foundational information and then build the complexity upon that, here's where I would start. If a Hebrew word begins with a hey, ask whether or not that hey is the definite article. Now, there are questions you can ask to verify that. For example, does the hey have a patak and does the next letter have a dagesh? If yes to both, then it is almost certainly a definite article. But start with hey. If a Hebrew word has a hey, it might be the definite article at the beginning. If a Hebrew word has a hey patak, it's probably the definite article. I mean, if it has hey patak dagesh, it's almost certainly the definite article. If it has hey patak, it could be the definite article. Probably is, because that's what happens in the. So we would say if it has a hey patak, it's probably the definite article. If it has hey patak hey or hey patak chet, then again, that's pretty certain that you've got a definite article there. If you see hey kametz at the beginning of a word, think to yourself, maybe this is the definite article. If it's hey kametz hey kametz aleph, hey kametz ayin, or hey kametz resh, that's almost certainly the definite article. If you have hey segel, probably the definite article. If it's hey segel chet kametz, hey segel hey kametz, or hey segel ayin kametz, it's almost certainly the definite article. So those are the four forms of the definite article that you may run into. Hey patak dagesh, hey patach, hey kametz, and hey segel. Those four forms may appear. Now, it's important to know when those would appear, just from a Hebrew understanding. But if you just know that those are the four forms of the definite article, hammer that first. Then try to learn when they appear. But at first, just start with these are the four forms of the definite article. And don't necessarily worry about when you see one form or the other. Just get those four forms down. Then once you've got the four forms down, you can go back and learn when this form appears versus that form.